So I kept my nights available just so Bill and I could get together and made no plans with anybody else, which today, there's no way in hell I would do that. I'd tell somebody to hit the road if they weren't willing to make any commitment. Hi, this is Mike Balaban. Welcome to another episode of BAMMER Tales. Today, I figured I'd talk to you about the summer of 1980 through 1981, even a little bit into 1982, when I had what I call my year with the models. I was 28. I was working in a Wall Street capital markets. I finished a training program, went onto the trading floor. I wasn't really having such a good time there. I wasn't doing all that well. I ended up getting involved unexpectedly in a 3 or 4 month affair with someone else on the trading floor who was, despite only being 26 at the time, was a big star, making a lot of money for the firm and heading his own trading desk. We met outside of work. We were both deeply closeted, but we met on the streets. Ended up having this affair, which I was ambivalent about because, it was a risky situation, both being closeted on Wall Street and having an affair with one's boss. Well, I'm jumping ahead. He would become my boss during that time. I was working out after work every day at the YMCA on the Upper West Side. One night I walked in and I saw this gorgeously all-American, handsome boy next door type about my age, and I was instantaneously smitten. Now, as a little background, growing up as an outsider in the Deep South, the only Jews in the county, et cetera, I always felt like a fish out of water. I felt like I didn't fit in. I felt unattractive physically, which of course, looking back in retrospect, was foolish because I was as good looking as the next guy. So when I was thrown into contact with the Golden Boys, if you will, those that were the football team quarterback and captain and charismatic, I would become infatuated with them. And that's what this guy reminded me of. I used to run 5 miles every day in Central Park. I was obsessed with remaining fit, cardiovascularly, physically, etc. And I was kind of addicted to the endorphin rush that comes from running. And somehow or other, over a period of nights, I managed to make contact, to approach this guy and introduce myself and say hello. And somehow we got to talking about running, and he was thinking about starting to run. And so we ended up agreeing to run together in Central Park, which was only about 75 yards outside the front door of the Y. So we would go out at night, we'd run 5 miles, and we'd come back. Initially, it started out as, well, do you want to go to dinner? Sure. I was enthralled with him. I would have done whatever he asked. But in any event, we began doing that, and somewhere after a few nights, I don't know how or when, it turned physical, sexual, and we ended up going back to his apartment. Now, he and I were only 3 blocks apart in that same Upper West Side neighborhood, so whether we went to his place or my place was pretty indistinguishable location-wise. But more often than not, I think we ended up back in his place. We began having a run in the park, dinner nearby, and then sex afterwards. I instantaneously wanted to be boyfriends. But what I learned from him, and his name was Bill Massey, was that Bill had been pretty much nonstop in relationships for the last 4, 5, 6 years and was done with them for the time being. What I should say is he was a male model, a working, successful male model with the Zoli agency, which is one of the major agencies. And his former boyfriend was Patrick St. Clair. Patrick was one of the most successful models with Ford Modeling Agency, the granddaddy in the business. And they had met on a model shoot in Thailand and gotten involved and been boyfriends for 2 years. And then when they separated, they remained really good friends, and Patrick was Bill's best friend. And after that, he got involved with one of the ne'er-do-well, the bad boy of 2 identical twins who were based out in the Hamptons outside of New York, a resort community with a beach 2 hours away. And for 2 years, he was involved with Danny Spencer, the bad boy of those twins, basically renovating and refurbishing a 250-year-old house that Bill bought. That broke up because Danny wasn't very stable. Then I come along and we meet each other. At some point, he even took me out to the house in the Hamptons and I met Danny, and that didn't go all that well, but they were just trying to be friends at that point. So Bill and I are having a regular, almost nightly sex romp. I'm falling in love with him. And then I learned something else about Bill. Because he had been so involved for so long, he wanted to be existentialist, as he put it, to make no plans, have no commitments, So he wouldn't even make plans beyond the day at hand. Nothing. No commitments for tomorrow, next week. And, we each have to go through a situation in life where you learn. And this was my learning situation. Of course, I caved in. I'm like, I don't care. So I kept my nights available just so Bill and I could get together, and made no plans with anybody else, which today, there's no way in hell I would do that. I'd tell somebody hit the road if they weren't willing to make any commitment. There I was, going to work on the trading floor, going to the gym afterwards to the Y, meeting Bill with no plans to meet, but we did it every night anyway, going out and running, coming back, going out to dinner, going back to his or my apartment having sex, waking up the next morning and going on to work not knowing when I would see him again. And it went that way every night for months. That's kind of crazy making, isn't it? The fact that I would put myself on hold like that with everybody else. But I was so infatuated, I didn't care. Now, along came Christmas. And what I should also say is, in the meantime, I ended my affair with the person at work, which wasn't the best move on my part. But I was so smitten with Bill that I didn't care. I got out of any other entanglements. And along comes Christmas. And Bill had told me he was going to go away on a vacation, which he did, to the Caribbean somewhere, for maybe 2 weeks. And I didn't hear from him once. Postcard, phone call, back then there was no email, of course. Nothing. And I was devastated and angry. And when he returned to New York after Christmas, I couldn't hold back. I was really upset, and I let him have it. And he basically said to me, Mike, I told you I didn't want any commitments. And that began a period over the next several months where we kept doing what we were doing, and I kept trying to persuade him otherwise and struggling to accept it and thinking about breaking it off, but I was so addicted to him that I couldn't. Then after those few months, I kind of just accepted it and realized he was going to be nothing more than a fuck buddy, which is not something I had ever had or really wanted. But again, I was so connected to him that I wasn't willing to let go with him entirely. And it was during that period that he began inviting me to hang out with him and Patrick St. Clair and Patrick's boyfriend, Vincent Sanchez, who was not a model. And the four of us would go lots of places together. And no disrespect to models, but as a Wall Street, New York, substance-oriented guy, my mind kind of vegetated when I was with him. We were talking about fashion and light and lively things that maybe it was just different interests, but it didn't appeal to me, and it was kind of boring, but I didn't care. I wanted to be with him and them, and I let it go. And we went out to the Hamptons and went camping for a weekend, and they came out to my house in Fire Island one weekend, and I was hanging out with them, and that's why I call it my year of the models. And finally, at the end of about a year in total of hanging out with Bill, having sex with him, and then doing it only occasionally, we began to kind of let go of each other, and I accepted him in my life as just a friend, and I would see him 2 or 3 times a year. We remained friendly and in touch, and I considered him a friend, but he was no longer core to my life, and I no longer had anything to do with any models. And I've never dated another model since then. At one point, I would find out in the mid-90s that Bill had just passed away suddenly from AIDS, which was a shock. Because as far as I knew, Bill was a top only. And regardless of what he was fairly careful. And it was the mid-90s, by which time fewer men were dying, and we were just about to get into the age of the protease inhibitors, the cocktails that allowed gay men to live with AIDS as a manageable disease for a long life. But Bill passed away, and he will be missed for the rest of my days. I should also say that I no longer had any contact with Patrick or Vincent, although I ran into Vincent once or twice over the years at the gym. I heard that Patrick had started up his own modeling company and moved back to Paris, and I knew people that were in touch with him for a while, but he's also fallen out of contact. So if anybody watching this knows Patrick St. Clair, any idea of where he might be, my hope is that he's still alive and didn't also pass away. I would love to hear from you about him and be able to reconnect with him. Again, this has been a story of my year with the models. Thanks for listening. Mike Balaban, another episode of BAMMER Tales.